Now let's go back to the story of Muhammad and Mark. Muhammad is groomed to be aggressive, not to compromise, to protect the womb of the women of his kinsmen at all costs. He's brought up with the idea that he has enemies, with the idea of victory and defeat, shame and honor. Mark is brought up with the idea of compromise and conformity, respect for the decision of his womenfolk. The idea that there are no enemies because you can talk it out. Without globalization, without immigration, without the fact that we are in ever closer proximity with each other and between these values and cultures, Muhammad and Mark's lives would each have taken their own course. Oops. But in reality, in our reality, they come together and sometimes they collide. It's about this collision that we have to think about. Whose ideas, whose values, whose way of life prevails? The answer to that question is very important. I belong to the fortunate few who are intimately exposed to both, and I have made my choice. I welcome your questions. Thank you. You'll only make me nervous. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions, we have two of our student ambassadors here with handheld mics. If you raise your hand, they'll get the microphones to you.
Ayaan, my 80-year-old mother-in-law just recently read your book, and she wanted to ask you if you believe that Islam is capable of undergoing the kind of enlightenment that, for example, Christianity did.
It's very important when we are talking about Islam to make a distinction between Islam as a set of beliefs and Muslims as individuals who are either born into Islam or somehow are introduced to those sets of ideas. If I believe strongly that Muslims as individuals can reconcile themselves with modernity, with liberalism, with democracy, with whatever idea, and by doing so will relinquish much of what is demanded of them in Islamic theology. But if I take Islamic theology separately as a set of ideas, and I offset them against classical liberalism, against what? The ideas of socialism, or the ideas of communism, or the ideas of Catholicism, I'll find there very many differences. And the set of ideas that I find that Islam collides the most with is liberalism. But not Muslims as individuals. I was born into an Islamic society, and I am where I am because I have a mind of my own, and I believe that every single Muslim person, every single Russian or Chinese, every single human being has a mind of his or her own. How much of it is challenged? Yeah.
I have two questions. First, what is the current status of where you're living right now? I'm under the impression that the Dutch government is no longer offering you protection. Secondly, where has the American media been in promoting your cause? Where has Oprah Winfrey, Ellen DeGeneres, Katie Couric? You strike a multicultural ideal that their world puts on a pedestal. Yet somehow Christopher Hitchens seems to be the only person in American popular culture that seems to be representing you. Have you noticed that? Those are my two questions. Pop culture and your current resident status, and if you're being protected properly.
Goodness. and I say that. In Holland, I remember saying once, Jesus, and then this guy comes behind me and tells me, do you want to convert? So I thought I'll just say goodness. I have to be very vague on that. A, because revealing where I live is about the worst thing I can do. I live in the United States. But I'm not going to tell you where I live. Second, the Dutch government has stopped paying for my security as of the 1st of October 2007. And ever since, the American Enterprise Institute's president, Chris DeMuth, former president now, reached out to as many donors as he can. And so if you want to donate to my security, you donate to the American Enterprise Institute, and you say, this is just for our security, and they'll administer that because it's a 501c3. It's a bureaucratic term I've just learned about. And with that, with those donations, we are able to finance the gentlemen you see around. And then finally, on pop culture, I've been in contact when I was in Holland with Time, and they put me on their list of Time 100 most influential blah, 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 blah. I've been interviewed by 60 Minutes. I've been on the Bill Maher show, the Colbert Report, and so on. But there's a catch to, I've not been on Oprah and the others you mentioned, which I hope the longer I am, after learning the American Constitution, I'll be introduced to the other names. But there's a catch-22, which is the more publicity I seek, the more I put myself in danger. So as long as my security, my personal security is taken care of, then I'm able to go out and go into pop culture. But again, I have a message that is not, it's not appealing to pop culture. It's, like I said, you can't matter too much. Don't rock the boat. And I think a lot of people who operate in public culture still have not worked out for themselves what their position is toward Islam and the position of Islamic women.
Do you want me to hold it? I got it. Well, first, thank you very much. I'm having a large dose of you. I saw you last night in The Third Jihad, which was a movie, and that was very good. And your statements were good. My question is, we are currently in a Mark Mohammed situation with the clash of civilizations that you mentioned. What is your advice, or if you were president, what would you do in confronting Islam, or radical Islam, currently?
I'm not president. I didn't like politics when I was in it. Another feature, really striking feature between Europe and the United States for me, is that America is not only about a creed of freedom that I'm beginning to understand and to learn, but it's also about its suspicion towards government. America is a civil society, civil activism. In Europe, we rely on government. In order to fight any collectivist threat to that American creed, what you see is American individuals questioning it. Who was Karl Marx? What was his message? If we take his ideas to their logical consequence, how will society look like? We, in the United States and in Europe, have asked ourselves these questions. Now, the next thing is, we need to do the same, given the fact that the challenge, the collision we are facing in the 21st century is with Islam, of whom there are 1.2 to 1.5 adherents. I think it's high time that we start to ask ourselves, who was Muhammad? What did he say? How did the society that he proposed look like, and how does it differ from ours? What's his creed as opposed to ours? How much of it is religion? How much of it is politics? And how do we deal with that? And we're all shying away from that. Americans probably because there is this natural attitude of respect towards religion, any religion, and Europeans, because they just don't know what to do. So ask, who is Muhammad? What does he, why? To the Muslim, Muhammad is infallible because he believes in him as an icon. But if you're a Christian or an atheist like me, or a Jewish person, or whatever, Buddhist, you can just sit down in your study room and wonder who was Muhammad. Goodness.